The plight of the chestnut trees, their grandeur, the huge place they leave empty in the life of the mountains, has been dawning on me slowly for a quarter of a century. In 1900, the chestnut was the great provider here. It nourished these woodlands, creepers, flyers and walkers, all of us, scattering its manna at our feet. It, or they, some 10 billion, interlacing their branches above us. One evening in 1968, during the first snowfall, I went foraging for firewood in the hollow below the cabin I was building. My building was incomplete, for the life here was new to me. I was testing a half-rotten hickory limb with the tip of my axe when I felt, in the twilight, on the slope above me, as if overwatching my work, forms having the quality of life, like spectators in a semicircular amphitheater. I approached the first row and looked more closely. There were dozens of gray stumps above the snow, open to the snow, hollow, receptive, and perfectly still. There they sat like a congregation, cradling in their laps the soft, fresh snowfall. But I found they were not heavy like other hardwoods. It was easy to carry them up my hill. Neither were they too soft, for they burned with intensity. They were dense and dry inside, even though light, and they broke along the grain at a single touch of my axe blade. They opened and came down at a touch, and they kindled so readily and released their heat so quickly, and then sustained it for so long, that only a few sticks were enough to light a damp oak log. When they were plentiful, I didn't even bother to keep my kindling dry. But I began to put them aside, to save them. For what purpose, I wasn't sure. The inside of these hollow stumps revealed complexities, a loveliness. Each was carved into countless minute cells. Within each there was concealed a city, set off against the unbroken, monotonous flat plains of the snow. The articulations, the intricacies, the uneven depths and richness of these dark hives was breathtaking. They were like the beings I would speak of. My friend, Hewley Breedlove, who is one of these, and 87, tells me of times when, as a child, roaming the woods with his brother, swinging on saplings, they live all day on chestnut sprouts, tiny trees already rooted, reaching up with both leaves as if for their hands. We wouldn't even have to slow down much. We just reach down walking and pluck 'em out of the ground, tasting between the root and the branch the still sweet core, and feeding on it like them. What a picture to bury in the beginning of one's life, of the ties one feels of kinship with the rooted ones. Or a little older, on a fall day, tramping back across Two-Way Mountain from the mines in West Virginia. Or another wild goose chase when the mines shut down into Idaho, Maine, or Nebraska. Wanderlust and hunger have taken him to every state. He rakes the chestnuts around a tree into a pile, heaps the leaves over them and sets them afire. And as the fire cools, he breathes in the smoke which fills the hollow and feasts on the chestnuts, roasted the mountain way, and knows he has come home. We've lost this world, the great trees gone, and to the children too who knew of them. Now they lie here like swimmers drowned after some great catastrophe, some titanic failure in the springs of the world, of beauty and generosity, spendthrift abandon, grace, power. This generosity, this generative power of the great leaved creature, its prolific gifts to the life around it, sheltering under it and in it, was matched by its expressiveness, a fecundity not only of seed, but of shape. For not only did it nourish the forest, all of us indeed, it was also a reservoir of forms, in the sinuous coil and recoil of the long grain as it moves through the trunk, around the knots, through the junctures with branches, in the flow of the branches out from the trunk, in which each curve, each break or blemish, each knot, each turning and returning, marks an event in its history, a change which adapted. But there is something else here. Call it drama, passion even, heart. Consider the grain. One feels not only movement, but a kind of emotion pressing out in these lines. The poet's first apostrophe, O chestnut tree, great rooted blossomer, is followed by another, O body swayed to music, O brightening glance. To a dancer, the poem reminds us of their kinship. Tree, dancer. But for someone who has lived in the absence of these trees, in their fall, in their removal from the great life which they served so abundantly, the relation approaches identity. The chestnut tree is the body swayed to music, and the dance is a struggle to the end. But they have not departed. They're still all around. They have receded, but in spring one finds their leaves spread sparsely over the floor of the woods. They sprout from stumps, reach a certain height, and the blight kills them. Someone once told me that mutations are possible from the stump, not only from seed, that the trees do not have to produce chestnuts in order to transform themselves genetically, to disarm their destroyers. One young tree flourished within sight of my cabin for several years, from 1975 on. I followed its progress with increasing hope. When it began to have trouble in the mid-'80s, I cut the rot away at the base of the tree and painted the trunk. Over time, it grew to a height of some 35 feet. It died 5 years ago. The trunk is still standing near the edge of the path in the pine grove between my cabin and the top of the hill. And beneath it, the struggle goes on. There was this slowly forming awareness through all my years here of something I cannot see but have come to feel. Beneath vision, beneath awareness, in the interior of the mountain, there is this reservoir of life force, or of the refusal to die, to submit, subside, to be submerged, of heart. Slowly they have emerged unseen in my awareness, these huge root systems, centuries old, remnants of the mighty forest of their kind, fallen for nearly a century, down but not yet out, still vital, massive, unrelenting, ceaseless in their struggle to re-emerge and to connect, to yoke the energies of earth with those in the light. Though the forces are everywhere that bear them down, this is all I know of the sacred. The great ones have gone underground. The remaining root systems must be contracting, suffering shock each time the streams of sap are cut off. Will there be time enough then for them? For all of them together in the laboratories of the roots, in the links of these old frayed mountain chains, of Poconos, Green Mountains, Adirondacks, Alleghenies, Blue Ridge, Smokies, to find a way out of this. For their struggle is not only against the poison, but against time, which will cut off the struggle. So it's a race, if you will, a slow race but steady, against the death of the species. And theirs reminds me of mine. No wonder these shapes feel so familiar, that they can represent so much for someone who lives among their wreckage, and at once among the low fountains of their green spray, which rise spring after spring, wherever one falls. For their departure from here, catastrophic as it was also a presage, as well as contributing cause of countless others. It is not just their life which is in question, or even the life of the mountains, and it is not only my life and our life, it is the great life itself. Thus do they remind me. Slowly my thoughts about them have become folded into other preoccupations, other dawning awarenesses. Primarily it is of loss and departure, and that the world I know is supported by strangers whom I do not know. That the strangers labor ceaselessly beneath its surface, and that it is in grave danger, and that this danger is moderated by these labors, although from year to year the danger increases. The labor is to descend, to find the source which is hidden of the transformation which would save them, to begin to be that which they were not. Volle die Wandlung, will, transformation. Rilke. The great trees have pervaded my thoughts for so long now. Their presence, their absence is crucial. I know that in the invisible realm, which is the essential one, their labors have flowed into my own. It is our secret fund, this treasury of generosity, abandon, grace, shapeliness, information, staying power, and valor. To honor them, I made a garden west of my cabin. I imagine it as a kind of camp meeting, or first parliament of the creatures, praising and mourning the world. What has happened, they say? What is to be done? No one has an answer, yet they labor on. What is a writer's vocation? To Marlia, who asked, fresh in my modest novel, immured and chaste, I began to live in a huge, sprawling, raw city, which was called, by a writer I adored, the hard, flat, incurable sore of Birmingham. In my vacant room, on a ridge above that city, in fall, I listened to the locomotives working in the freight yards downtown, in the heart or belly of my hungry city, evacuating, losing its breakfast of commuters, snaking long streams of headlights in defile, in fealty up to the feet of the god of steel, then down into the leafy shadows of homewood. The cries of trains echoed on my ridge, and the low one opposite, across the bare, abraded flats, and the whole city was resonant in its desertion, with these low, mournful, monotonous, melodious cries, close to the floor of silence and descending into it in the deserted hours. Then I heard running feet. Child's bare feet on dry clinkers. A scream, a slap, a song, a screen door closing, a sudden wail. In the alleys between the blocks nearby, between the back porches of the white people, mingling with these longer cries, dreadful, sorrowful, and beautiful, freighted with echoes. Sometimes they'd wake me up, and I'd be drawn into them. Strange as it seems now, I'd go down into the city in the middle of the night and run all through it, through every section, rich and poor, white and black, over cement and gravel, lawn and dirt, through rolling parks between the sections, buffer zones strewn with rubble, to the evil shacks and barons across the railroads, from the Sears receiving dock where I worked by day. Each night I ran farther. It was my early life. I thought of my run as I thought of music, as I thought of the locomotives, as a thread between zones invisible, spun of the work and life, and the longer continuities outside us, yet moving within. And as I entered it, the city entered me, and into my poor novel, and enriched us both immeasurably, though finally not enough to save my story or keep me there. But it did more than that. It left me a precedent image, a standard for want and fear, as well as fulfillment, which I could never put into words or even approach with them, but whose energies have never ceased to supply me, perhaps for that reason, that I could never get it out, never separate it from my motive powers, never utter it. The picture was too wide and deep, and not in my eyes so much as they and I in it. At night, from the bluffs under Vulcan, I pondered the brilliant nebula on Aegis boil, spreading wide like a sterile gauze, a disinfected dressing, like camouflage, over that hard flat sore that would not heal, and felt through the train's cries the terrors lapping toward me, under 1,000 rooms floating derelict upon them, like houseboats bobbing abandoned in the libido dominandi and its poisonous effluvia dispersed in the wide air. The image was of a sound, a call which became a vibration distributed there also, a stillness which, like sound, was everywhere, yet nowhere, and yet which passed through the 1,000 rooms, and the rumors in them, our bodies, minds, dreams, between us and through us in its descent, inseparable from the beat of my heart, from the pulse of my wrist on the windowsill. It was here I began to work, Marlia. I'm bound to this beginning, bound to remember this and the others before it, in the rhythm under memory, inaudible. I'm bound to evoke for you now that early call. I want to speak of a vocation which is an echo of that voice or voices which most move us to stay with our work and life, the recalling which, if heard, could open not the ear but the life, to be a channel, a means of conduction, a medium for the voice behind it, calling to us through it, or for the voices which partake of that voice and mediate it for us, whispering or clamoring, crying even for our presence in some narrow path, for help, the pressure of a hand or word on some treacherous cliff's edge. Wherever it was conceived, my work was born in that place, and even now as I work, as I write to you, here, in this hollow, manhole oubliette, in my cup of mountains, with such dregs as these, the source image which collects my thoughts under the memory I relate to you and reach out with toward you, is of a wide floor and of voices which become inaudible as they descend and yet remain, buried yet still in us, without an end. So I must think of the writing as a means of conduction, of extending the channels we listen through outside our chambered lives into the life, and the voices engraved on that wide floor under all the rooms. We are so narrowly bounded in what we can do. From every warm door, society beckons. History allures us. Study supplies us with certain stores. We furnish our expeditions within the pale, but it is without, the vital work is done, and in the going out. We are all strangers when we go without. Now when our strangers trespass, they carry what they can. But when it's exhausted or jettisoned, when they can heave it no farther up the slope they're on, they begin to feed on those trains which they trace underway, whose ties they endure, whose tracks they lay down again on their way into the desert. When the first call is heard in the calling, pursued, heard in the life only, repeated, prolonged, sought for, in the path of its resonance. So it is felt more than heard, and not so much felt as lived, as felt for, sought for, deciphered in the braille of roads, in the directions of that path which they must follow without regard, taking no thought for where it leads, or what it gives them back when they get there, because it is the very thought and the gift itself. For the strangers, the vocation is only an echo, prolonged, a recalling of that first call, listened for and heard minutely, in the most secret place, devoid of other voices, in the core of the life as it passes, and obeyed, hearkened to. I kept thinking as I wrote this, I could never return there. To the town, maybe, but not to that first place of which I spoke, of invocation, the sight beneath sight and surrounding, connecting, situating it with others. That whether I return there or not, I'll never feel that way again. Not only the locomotive as it descended, spreading through all the rooms, the sound of earth trembling, of the earth in peril, but the residence of evening in the night, of fear and dream. Never register it again so deeply in my body and mind, so as to embody it in art, so as to even try to live it out, to dream it out from my own beginning, since I have only one. It came to me then, as I wrote you, that my only way of return to the life there was through the work here, of speaking out of what I've known, of listening to it, and of sounding and resounding what I cannot know or live alone or have forgotten. Of belonging my attention to the echoes, the residual rhythms and tonalities which descend beneath my thresholds of hearing or of speech into the basis of speech, which is the memory of earth, damaged, endangered, trembling beneath the world we've made. Attention to the basal echoes of the voice or voices which most moved me, whose vibrations reach me here still. I once wrote a story about 3 people, a young girl, a private, and an officer, who met one evening in an unfamiliar city and began to walk together. Each night they walked farther. The officer off duty in the evening was dressed in light summer clothes. The girl wore the starched white uniform of a waitress. The private was in uniform also, like hers, pressed severely, with a prominent name tag, Ransom. Close by, to the north of the city, lay a military reservation. As they walked, they'd hear the pounding of artillery, the scream of planes landing, the patter of automatic weapons fire from night vision fields. And they would feel the vibrations in the pavement of explosions farther to the north, which they could not identify. The 3 people rarely spoke to each other, but after many nights their path led out of the city to a low place where there was a pool where they bathed together. The girl was bound to the soldier Ransom in ways the officer never understood, but he did know that they, the 2 strangers with whom he had spent in silence so many evenings, and with whom he had removed the clothing in which he was disguised, were from the mountains. They were mountain people. In time there was a funeral in the mountains, overseen by the officer in uniform, in which a soldier was buried. Ransom participated in the ceremony and recognized the officer as such for the first time. Now, I had myself been an officer, and I came to realize years later that this strange couple, or couple of strangers, remembered and foreshadowed my life. Not only were they figures for the parents of my childhood, but they presaged my deepest friendships, which would come later. In more than one sense, I followed them back into the mountains, where I built a cabin and found them again in my friends in Hewley and Georgia, Philo and Beulah. A long time ago, before my mountain time, traveling, I would have dreams which would contain colors which would develop as in a dark room. And the longer they steeped there, the greater the saturation, until the beauty or the fear would wake me. Often the colors would be of catastrophe. The dream would be cut off before the end. Later, years later, I began to dream in words, and the words would wake me for the same reason. There was the same sense of passing over, of transgressing a threshold, beyond which the meaning or the beauty or both would become unbearable, as in a nightmare from which you must wake at the moment of death, the moment of crossing over into the place where you can go no farther. Slowly through years, I learned to remember. I'd write the phrase down as soon as it woke me, and, without thinking about it, fall asleep again. Later I'd wake again, write down another phrase, and so on. But without being conscious of any connection between the phrases. In the morning, on my bedside table, there'd be a couple of sheets, maybe 3 or 4, covered with sparse scrawl. Sometimes I couldn't read them. Sometimes the words would mean nothing, evoke no memory. Even if I could read them, they'd feel foreign, sent like a cablegram from across the ocean. Then I'd go to my desk and begin to type, to tap my sounds, the ones I could read. Most strange to me, most inexplicable, was the connection between the phrases, separated by long intervals of sleep. Strange, too, the rich meanings which a single word could radiate, like sunrise through the opalescent mist, divided by the tall oaks in the ravine below my cabin at dawn. The dream words taught me this, that the connection between the phrases, separated by the dark interval of sleep, may involve more than one of the radii in that radiance of sense, as points of departure for the transition, the leap of sleep and of the sleeper through the dark. The basic unit, the given, presented by the dream, was no longer the single word, but these manifold, many-directioned, melodic phrases, which were the gifts of sleep. They were also its products, sleep put to work, because years of preparation lay behind this work, of finding the lower level, the caves beneath the garden, the S-bahns beneath the Stadtmitte, the hollow beneath the mountain rim at dawn. But I still compose like this. I work these seed phrases, these givens, into my rougher, less gifted ones, and then purge and amplify, building slowly. The first given melodic phrases are indivisible. They resist dissolution. They resist our other tendencies to come apart. They're given a certain shape that's recognizable, imbued with memory, like my father's words by the lake in the poem A Memoir, which came to him whole. The bond between the words is this integrity, this resistance, this réseau de résistance, pervasive, subversive, integrated, whole, manifold, intact, whose signature is the melody of the voice in its road, heard only there, in the midst of passing, in and through its transience, through the passages it makes. Credo, then. In this way, beings who search for essences, for the transient integrities, to remember across the life, in words, tones, lives, those trains which express their deepest passions, may contribute to another memory, vastly more whole. If God is recollection, as Whitehead said, then the dream beneath these words is an exercise in memory, in that memory which moves beneath my knowledge, beyond my control, on that wider floor where more has fallen and been memorized, secreted, cached, than I could know. But certain labors in that floor, in which I participated, pooled certain deposits, certain times, translated memory into words, words into phrases, and then came out with them, made them one utterance, embedded in that floor, charged with that characteristic melody which was their signature, not mine only, with that radiance of sense, those mysterious lines of continuity, of memory, of meaning, of word upon word, that train of thought ever lengthening between the fragmentary word clusters, through the dark intervals of sleep, the broken signature and trace, the sign of the unknown one, or ones beneath my hand, on the wide floor under all the rooms, on that level where my strangers descended to bathe in the pool beneath the city.